Hey, welcome back. This is Alicia Cash of Whimsy and Eek, and today I want to talk to you about the new Snow White movie. There's been so much about it on the news, and I think that there's a lot of the reactions are missing a lot of the psychology of the story, the history of the story, and I felt that I needed to tell you about it because it really gives more layers to what's going on here and whether there's any validity in changing the original 1937 movie. I don't feel like anyone's really doing any sort of deep dive into what Snow White is about or really looking at the history of it or anything else like that. They're just quickly going over it and being outraged. And I think that it would help if you know history of the story, the time which the movie came out, and then to kind of talk about how fairy tales evolve and gradually build on themselves, and they're kind of a gumbo of our collective consciousness. Okay, so as the stories are told and retold and they change forms and they're written down or they're made into movies or into plays and they're told around the fire, things are added, things are taken out, and the stories kind of change and evolve. And it's a little bit harder now because we do have them written down in books or we have them in a movie format, and you think, oh, Snow White, the original Snow White is the 1937 Disney classic. Well, that's not the actual original Snow White. The thing is the original, we don't really know where it is or when it was because this was a story that was told for many, many years, all throughout Europe, throughout Asia. It was eventually written down by the Brothers Grimm, and they had several editions that they made, and they eventually edited it and changed it according to their editions. And what they wrote down wasn't the same as what they were told. So then Disney came along and he made changes and added some things and took some things out. But Disney was very good at feeling what the audience wanted and then giving them what they wanted. And there was a feedback loop of, okay, this did well in the theater, so we'll do more of that. This didn't do well, we'll put that to the side, you know. So it's important for filmmakers and storytellers, whether you're writing, acting, or doing music, to kind of pay attention to what goes well, what hits a nerve, what sparks people's interest. And I think right now, Hollywood doesn't know what that is because the loudest people are so far out on either side. Like they're way out there or they're way out there, and most of the people are in the middle, and nobody's listening to us. That that doesn't make for good YouTube. It doesn't make for good reactionary pieces. It's just doesn't make the money that the extremes, you know, not everyone wants to be a girl boss, but not everyone wants to be a trad wife. There's like a big chunk in between those two options of everyday normal people who love their spouses, they love their kids, they want to have a good life, they enjoy their job, but it's not everything to them. They enjoy their kids, but they don't want to just be a mom. They want to do other things too. There's just so much in there in the middle, a wide variety of people. Women in particular, because this movie is about women and their interactions. But I just think that we should really talk about a little bit more what it means. Okay, so in the olden days, so one of the first Snow White stories was about a king and a queen, and they're out riding in the countryside, and the king sees some snow and some blood in the snow, and there's some crows around it, and he says, "Oh, I wish I had a daughter whose skin was as white as snow, whose lips were as red as blood, and whose hair was as black as ravens." And lo and behold, as they're riding along in their carriage, they come across the girl that fits that very description. And she's beautiful. Well, The king is absolutely smitten with her. The queen, not so much. She's very jealous. So she ends up telling the driver to keep on going, and they leave the girl behind. Um, Come to Brother Grimm times. In their early editions, it's the mother who becomes jealous of her daughter. Later editions, it becomes the stepmother, and I'll go into why that is later on, but just to give you an idea. So the mother, she pricks her finger, and 3 drops of blood fall on snow. She's looking out the window at the snow, and it's a ebony window, and so she thinks those colors are beautiful. Again, wishes for a child, and she ends up giving birth, and then she dies in the process of giving birth. Now the king remarries after a year, and the new wife is very vain and very beautiful. And things exist all right until Snow White's about 10, when the queen starts to notice that she is becoming more beautiful, and the mirror tells her that Snow White's more beautiful than her. Um, and then she, of course, asks the huntsman to take her into the woods and kill her. He can't do it, so he decides, well, I'll just send her into the woods. She's going to die anyway, but at least I haven't actually killed her myself. She runs into the woods, finds the dwarfs, and most of that you already know. She exchanged work for a place to live, and she's very happy there for some time. They don't say how long, but she's there for some time. Now the queen eventually finds out that Snow White's still alive and dresses herself up, and she, in the story, she visited Snow White 3 times. The first time she goes, and each time the dwarfs tell Snow White, we're going to the mine, stay inside, don't let anybody in. The queen is very tricky. She can disguise herself, so don't trust anyone. And Snow White agrees. So the first time, the queen comes dressed as a peddler, and she's got laces. And laces, I think, are like a corset that kind of go underneath the chest right here to pull the womanly figure in. And she convinces Snow White to try it on, and that she'll lace her up. And she's coming into adolescence. She wants to look pretty, and she lets the queen do this. And well, she ties it so tight that she can't breathe, and she passes out. The queen leaves, the dwarfs come, and they cut the laces so that she can breathe again. She comes back to life. Again, they warn her, and Snow White then gets tempted by the queen with a comb, and it's a poison comb. So when the queen brushes her hair, it sticks in the scalp. She passes out and dies. Dwarfs come back, they take the comb out. I'm just kind of going over this because some people haven't read the Grimm's version. And again, Warner. And finally, the queen comes a 3rd time with the apple. Now, this apple's a little bit different. It is poisoned, but half of it is poisoned and half of it isn't. There's a red portion that's poisoned, and the white portion isn't. And so Snow White doesn't want to let the queen in, doesn't want to take the apple, and the queen's like, what harm will it do? And she cuts it in half, and she eats half of it, and show that it's not poison. Well, so Snow White eats the other half and dies. Again, the queen leaves. The dwarves are overcome with grief. They just can't stand the idea of putting her into the ground, and so they put her in a glass coffin. And Prince comes like a year later and just is struck by her beauty. She doesn't seem to have decomposed in any way, and he just doesn't want to be without her, and somehow convinces the dwarfs to let him take her with him. So as he's loading the coffin onto his horse, it dislodges the apple, and she's able to breathe again, and she comes back to life. And then she rides off happily ever after. Now, we're getting to the Disney version. There were some parts that were cut. One of the parts that I think makes a big difference is the fact that there was a part where they had the prince had been kidnapped by the evil queen, and he's being held in the dungeon, and she's trying to force him to marry her, and he refuses. So she's leaving him to die in the basement the cellar area fills with water. He manages to escape and tries to get there in time to stop Snow White from eating the apple, but he eats not in time. But he does show up pretty soon after that and kisses her and dislodges the apple, and thus she comes back to life. I think that does change things a little bit, but Disney wisely knew or figured out that the story is not really about the prince. The story is about Snow White and the Queen. I'm going to get into that in just a second. But first, you should know about what things were like in 1937. I know it was a different time, yes, but there was a lot of things going on in 1937 that I don't think modern feminists really think about. Like these young girls, they don't really know their history. For example, Amelia Earhart disappeared in 1937. She was very well known. She was pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be a woman, and doing all these amazing things, flying all over the world. She was an inspiration, still to this day, to a lot of women, to know that you can do anything the guys can do, including not asking for directions and getting lost. Just my joke. It's okay. On one last note from Ethel Barrymore, which is the great aunt of Drew Barrymore. So Ethel Barrymore's brother John was Drew Barrymore's grandfather. But they're both from a very long line of actors and actresses and theater people that go way, way, way back. And she wrote this, I'm guessing, sometime after 1913. I'm not sure exactly the time that she wrote it, but I don't think it was much later than maybe the 1930s. I'm not entirely sure because it doesn't actually say the date that it was written. It's called Backstage by Ethel Barrymore. It's in this book, America, the Illustrated Diary of Its Most Exciting Years. And she talks about family and some other things, but I want to read to you in her words what she said about what life was like for women at that time. In the midst of her active career on the stage, my mother cared for her children without a thought to that much mooted question of career and motherhood might apply to her. When anyone asks me if a married woman can have a career, I can only recite the history of my family. My grandmother had 4 children and a career. My mother had 3 children and a career. I have 3 children. Miss John Drew, mother of my uncle, had a theater in Philadelphia, which she managed for 50 years. In addition to her domestic duties, she succeeded in presenting the foremost actors of the time, Booth, Macready, McCullough, in that city. She went on the stage when she was 3 and was still active at 78 when she died. So that gives you an idea of like it was not completely uncommon for women to have careers and have children. A lot of times you kind of had to do both. But also over here she says, I believe that our privilege is the portrayal of the life we can best depict, the life of our own time. Women have never had such richness of expression, such power of growth as they have today. I believe that any woman artist, on the stage or elsewhere, is shirking in her duty if she fails to show in her art that she is in touch with the fuller life of women. Women are getting away from the faults of their training and coming in touch with the great issues of modernity with an enthusiasm that will react upon their development more intensely than a man's ordinary interest in affairs now does. Women are branching out into new lines of art. Women are succeeding better in old branches. Women are thinking, feeling, growing with a rapidity unparalleled in their history. They realize the tremendously worthwhile things that can be accomplished through this new growth. This ability gives something of value in partnerships. That largely explains my appearance with Mr. Hampton. And it goes on about her work with Mr. Hampton and working on her Shakespearean roles. But the fact that she's talking about you grew within the partnership, like you had the male and the female, like they grow together, and that's where you can really push the envelope and really redefine how men and women interact together and how they can both benefit from from working on each other's strengths and shoring up each other's weaknesses and becoming better people because of it. And that's what I think we really ought to be doing. Other things going on in 1937, you had you were in the midst of the Great Depression. A lot of people didn't have work, had a hard time keeping food on the table or a roof over their heads. Part of the reason why this film really resonated with people was because people were going through such a hard time, and the scene with the dwarfs in their cottage in the woods, it really resonated with people. The fact that they were so excited about soup and a vegetable soup. You know it was vegetables because she wasn't going to chop up those animals after they dusted everything. You just don't do that. So it was a vegetable soup and some bread, and they were very grateful and happy about it. And then they told stories and they sang songs and they danced together, and it really cheered people up to partake in the simple things. And that the important thing was is that she was safe and she had made this new family, made these new friends. And even though the witch was or the queen witch was out there and was a threat, they could just hang out and have a good time and be happy. And that was really important. um, Mae West, if you don't know her, definitely look her up. She said at the time that the only movie that made money that year was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. She said it would have made twice as much if you'd let me play Snow White, which, if you know Mae West, you'd understand. Mae West is a very voluptuous sex siren. Just, she is what I think modern feminists want to be. She's very feminine, very boisterous, doesn't take crap from anybody, didn't feel like she had to be tied down in a marriage, but she also never had kids. And she became a sex siren on in the movies at the age of 40, which is very impressive. Every generation thinks that they are the modern generation.
I'm a modern 30s woman.
That's just what everyone does when they are going about their lives. And in 20 years, people are going to look back at this and not think we're very modern. It's just the way of the world. This was Disney's first real full length feature. He mortgaged his house for it. He had to get a loan for $250,000 in the middle of it because they'd run out of money. Um, Thankfully, he showed it to a banker. He showed what they had of the film already, showed it to the banker. The guy didn't say anything through the whole movie. And then when he got done, he's like, "You're going to make a lot of money on this movie." And gave him the loan. And they ended up making $8 million. And he used that money to expand his studio. And really, I don't think Disney, the company, would exist if it wasn't for Snow White. That's how important this movie is in the history of Disney. There was like 50 names for the dwarfs. You're gonna love. I picked out a couple for you guys to know: Deafy, Hickey, Lazy, Gabby, Burpy, and Baldy. And I'm gonna have to say, I wish we had had a Burpy. That would have been great. But come on, admit it, a Burpy dwarf would have been hilarious. And they actually paid. Walt Disney actually paid a $5 bounty on any gag that you came up with to put in the movie. He wanted there to be a lot of pratfalls and gags and humor. He knew people wanted to laugh. And that's what really made Disney what it is. It's the laughter, the happiness that you get when you come out of the movie theater and you're just happy. So, two of the books that I spent a lot of time reading in were Folk and Fairy Tales by Martin Hallett and Barbara Carrasco, and then The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim. These are both really great books. I highly recommend them. But Bettelheim over here, he made some interesting points that just because a story is unreal doesn't mean it's untrue. Stories depict in imaging and symbolic form the steps necessary for growing up and achieving an independent life. And that's basically what all fairy tales are about, is how the things that you need to do in order to get to a better life, or to get through the dark times. All of these things, they're really important for that. And this story in particular deals with Oedipus complex. And there's a couple different types of Oedipus complex. It's not as simple as a boy who wants to marry his mother and kill his father. Like, that's the story of Oedipus. But if you look at that Greek tragedy as you go back in the lineage of Oedipus, there's a whole background of fathers being jealous of sons, or being overprotective of their daughters, or siblings being too close together, or fighting with each other. And really, you want to read some messed up stuff, read some of the Greek tales, because they're really messed up. But they're true, because there is a lot of rivalry and difficulty in raising a child, and rivalry within the family. So you can look at Oedipus complex as either the same-sex parent being jealous of the child, outshining them, or becoming smarter, more beautiful, stronger, whatever that is. Whether it's a father being jealous of his son, who's now an entrepreneur, where his father never got out of working the 9 to 5 shift for somebody else. Or the mother being jealous of the daughter, who's now more beautiful than she is, because the mother is now older and simply cannot be as beautiful as she was when she was 16 or 18 or 20. And those jealousies they can naturally occur, especially if you haven't built a bond with your child that isn't a rivalry bond. Like, you want to be happy for your kid that they are now so successful and so beautiful and so smart, and you want them to go out there and bloom and be amazing. But there can be problems with that, and some parents don't have that. And it's very difficult for the child to navigate that situation, because here's your parent that you love, but you also kind of hate them because they're treating you badly. And that's a very difficult thing to work out and figure out. And that's what the fairy tales kind of help you do, by showing that, hey, you can't control how they're going to behave, but you can grow away from them and out of the situation, become fully actualized and fully integrated, so that you are a fully functioning adult and can have good relationships with your spouse, which is the highest form of adulthood, is to find someone that you love and spend your life with them. Hopefully you have children. If not, things are different now, yeah, but you're being part of a great history of parenting, and that's a wonderful thing. There's also the Oedipus complex of the opposite sex parent trying to hold their child in infancy because they don't want that child to ever leave them. They're attached to the child, and they want that child's affection forever. So whether that's a father who doesn't want his daughter to ever start dating, and so he shoos off all the suitors, or a overbearing, suffering mother who doesn't want her son to ever get married and find a wife and have children. And there are lots and lots of stories about the overbearing mother-in-law who has a dad or a mama's boy who can't have a good relationship with his wife because mom is so overbearing, and he feels that he needs to be loyal to his mom instead of to his wife. And so he can't have this mature relationship because he hasn't cut ties over here. And the same for the daughter. If she's a daddy's girl and can't say no to dad in order to have a relationship with her husband, that's just not going to happen. And she's going to have kind of a miserable adulthood, because at some point her dad is going to die, and then she's not going to have anyone. So, and of course this still applies if you're in same-sex relationships, but there's different levels of complexity there. I really don't know all that psychology, so I imagine that it's the same. point is, you want your kids to grow up and be successful. And Snow White is kind of a story about the Oedipus complex. You've got rivalry, the dwarfs. There's a whole psychology to that. First of all, as a 10-year-old, she's coming into a house with 7 men. If they're dwarfs, they're not as intimidating. They'd be more comfortable with them because they aren't fully grown men. And they're also symbolic of people who get stuck as sort of an in-between stage of they're not children, but they're not fully adults. They have no parents, but they also don't have any spouses or children. So they haven't really fully grown up. They kind of got stuck in this. They're older, but they're not adults. And that's the symbolism of the dwarfs. That's not what actual people with dwarfism are like. But this is, it's just supposed to be symbolic. Take everything with a grain of salt around the rim of a margarita if you can. Now, the 3 deaths, again, those are symbolic of her transitioning from childhood to adulthood, and it takes time to make that transition. And sometimes you just kind of have to be quiet and spend some time on your own and really get to know who you are and decide how you want to be in the world. I think what might be the best thing to walk away from Snow White is that the queen is absolutely, aside from the fact that she can't let her daughter grow up and is jealous of the fact that she is aging and cannot be as beautiful as Snow White.
Tell me if I'm more beautiful than Snow White.
Snow White? The 18-year-old with the perfect skin? Honey child, you chose the wrong person to compare yourself to. Come on now.
But also, the queen has made this decision that the only things in her life that are worthwhile are power and beauty, and maintaining her beauty so that she can have power over other people. She does not have any real relationships. You don't see the king at all. They don't say that he's dead. He's just incompetent and unable to rein in his wife's vengeful behavior. Just as the huntsman, he was unable to rein in the queen. He is ineffectual and incapable of providing the protection that he is supposed to provide. Fathers are supposed to provide protection, the mothers, the nurturing, and the food. And so these 2 things are very important, but it's why the stepmothers are usually depicted as evil, whereas the stepfathers are usually depicted as more ineffective or incompetent. Because if your mother doesn't love you, or if you're having problems with the mother, without the mother, you die as a child. You just do, because she's the one that provides the food, the security. She's the one that nurtures you. She's the one that makes sure that you eat and have a roof over your head and all these other things. And yes, the father is there, but he's to protect you from the wilderness. He's to protect you from the wolves out there and from the bears, and he's supposed to protect you from any evil people within the home or within the village. But the queen is focused on power and beauty, whereas Snow White nurtures relationships. And because she nurtures relationships with animals, with the dwarfs, and then with the prince. Because she's focused on forming actual real relationships where she has a bond of mutual respect, love, honesty, and caring, because of that, she is able to have a happily ever after. Whereas the queen, she dies, and she dies horribly. Now, in the Brothers Grimm, she ends up having to put on metal shoes that are red hot, and then she dances to death. Whereas in Snow White, the movie, she falls off a cliff. Both are horrible deaths, and honestly, it's kind of a tale about you don't want to die alone. You don't want to die miserable and alone, because let's face it, no one deserves that, except for Jeffrey Epstein, but let's face it, he didn't die alone. The things that this movie should be about is building up good relationships with people. And whether those are friendships, whether those are family ties, whether those are romantic ties, you want to build relationships that are tight. You want to have people in your life who love and respect you, who treat you well, and who you treat well. Because if you're not treating them well, they're not going to treat you well. I think one of the things with modern life that we have lost is building actual relationships with people, not just online, but in our actual everyday lives. And people are more focused on their career and gaining power rather than building a family, building a tight knit, close group of friends. They have sacrificed their friendships, their relationships, they've sacrificed love and family for power, money, and beauty. Those are the things that are being held up right now in society. And they aren't worth anything. They really aren't. They're not going to be there when you die. They're not going to hold your hand as you're gasping for your last breath. They're not going to be sitting there talking to you, telling you stories while you're suffering from dementia. They're not going to be there for you. It's just not worth it. What you want to do is go out there and make relationships, make friends, fall in love, get married, have kids. I don't care who you do that with, so long as they're an adult and it's consensual, I don't care. But find people that you want to be around. It doesn't have to be a lot. Just a couple people. Better to have a few very close friends than a million online followers who you don't know and don't care about. So that's my TED Talk. It's my random advice. I know I sort of rambled at the end. I hope this was interesting to you. I hope it was informative. I highly suggest these books. They're very good. You can also pick up Joseph Campbell, Myth to Live By, and Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. I've not read this, but I took the online courses on his website. I highly recommend them. They're very interesting. Joseph Campbell I've read, but he rambles, but it is very fascinating. And these two, I would, if you're just starting to look into psychology of fairy tales, this one I think is the best one to start off with. I will leave a link to all of these down below. This is not a promotion. This is just what research I did. So I just want you to know my references. So if you like this content, please like and share and subscribe. Comment down below. Tell me what I did right. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me where I'm completely off my nut. And explain it all down to me. All to me down below. I appreciate the feedback, honestly. This isn't something I normally do. I'm probably going to do at least one other video of this because I want to talk about Red Riding Hood. I have a deep affinity for Red Riding Hood, and I want to share some thoughts on her story, and also how you can go about reading stories in order to kind of figure out why they resonate with you and possibly help you work through some things in your life by meditating on different fairy tales and various stories and seeing how they affect your life. So if you want to help the channel, there's an affiliate link down below. There's also links to my Redbubble page, my Instagram. I'm happy to take commissions on artwork. You can buy my artwork on various websites, Redbubble in particular, but also off my own website. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I hope this is of some value to you at all. Thanks. Bye.